I wanted to talk a little bit about the Strava getting rid of sensors thing. So this is it's sort of on topic for the industry, a little off topic for what I generally do. And in everything I read, if we go over to like cycling tips, essentially they say supporting Bluetooth devices was causing the app to crash during recording, whether or not a sensor was connected. Disabling this feature significantly improves recording stability for all athletes. I have got some really mixed feelings on the statement. So I've written a little bit about ANT and BLE. They ditched ANT with it. Bluetooth and ANT sensors will no longer appear directly. But, I mean, if this was, what year is this? If this was 2014, yeah, I could see them doing this. But in late 2019, 4 revisions of Android and probably 4 or 5 of iOS that really rectified all of these problems, it doesn't add up. So what's not adding up? Let's rewind a little bit. And a few years ago, I wrote a few things on this, mainly why hasn't ANT Plus been crushed by BLE, and the case of protocols, Kinetic and ANT Plus and BLE, I think are sort of relevant. These were written back in 2016. So essentially, I think the first thing is I used to work with a lot of people who were excited about technology, and I always felt like I was a bit of the cynic, and I guess I am. I'm unwilling to just jump into the pool and be like, yes, this technology will save everything and will change our industry. So when BLE hit 4, I worked with people who were like, oh, this is changing everything. ANT Plus is dead. ANT Plus is dead. And then 4.1, and then 4.2, and I think there might have been a 4.3. By the time I left, Bluetooth 5 was rolling around. Even they were getting sick of spouting their own BS on the situation, I think. And it's not that they were wrong. It's that there's fundamental differences on how Bluetooth and ANT work. So when I was doing my new Zwift cheating video, I had Simulant crash on me, blue screen to death on my computer. It's not like brand new unstable hardware, but it's not old antiquated hardware. It's like a year old. Most recent drivers, BIOS updates, all that stuff, and it hasn't ever, beside one time, blue screened on me. And then using the AMP Simulant, yeah, it blue screened. Something went wrong, and it did it again to me this morning. So, admittedly, the ANT group is a smaller amount of people. It's controlled by Garmin, and there's not as much development. And it's one of these things that I hear constantly from a lot of startups, is that they can't find anyone with ANT Plus experience. I know one guy who's freelancing between 2 or 3 companies while working a full-time job because they're so limited in terms of experience with ANT Plus. What's really funny is it's exceedingly simple. It's an order of magnitude more simple to use than BLE. But because it has more open and rigorous standards, you can't just be like, oh, it doesn't work on one unit, but we can forget about it. No. Like if it has that little sticker and says it is a power meter and you have a head unit that's power meter compatible, it will work. Whereas with PLE, it's only recently they've kind of sorted out the heart rate monitors. And I think because of Zwift mainly on, I'll say, the Apple products, and I'm not a real Apple user, but Zwift on Apple TV, I think changed the paradigm for BLE compatibility. Mainly on the hardware supplier side, because you know what? Since I think 2014, 2015 is when Apple transitioned to Core Bluetooth. Core Bluetooth meant that the API access to Bluetooth on an iOS device and a Mac OS device were the same. And Android did around the same time, but there was also some weird restrictions with it, and it started coming through with the pop-ups related to, oh, you want a purer sensor, you need location access, which doesn't make a lot of sense until you realize Wi-Fi, cellular connectivity, Bluetooth all exist in the same modem packages. Though they also exist in there with the GNSS system, so your GPS, Baidu, GLONASS, Galileo satellites, anything that for navigations was also baked into those modems as kind of cost-cutting measure and size-saving measure. So that meant that there was no way they could really forbid location access. So Android made the decision to, when you want to use Bluetooth, you have to have location access. And it just makes it seem really sketchy. But it was around that time that the whole Bluetooth API got really unified for Android. And yeah, there's been updates along the way. And yeah, they're sporadic, like is it 4.3? Is it 4.2? Is it 5? Compatibility. And now with 5.1 and directional antennas, that's another aspect that hasn't been it's going to cause a few more API access problems. But for regular sensors, like we're talking old school Bluetooth 4.0 is anything on like will generally work. You don't need 4.1, you don't need 4.2, you don't need 4.3, you don't need 5, you don't need 5.1, 4. So almost any smartphone you pick up today can handle it. And they have a unified API that the stability of that API is related to the device supplier and the Android open source project. With the iPhone, it's just Apple's fault. But you have to think about, like, there are pieces of hardware out there now. So if you buy like a top tier trainer, it could be 30 or 40 kilos. If they have a bad firmware update that bricks the device and they say, oh, just ship it in. Yeah, do you know how much it is to air ship if you don't have massive corporate accounts with FedEx and UPS outside of, in the US, it's a lot cheaper. But I looked it up. In order for me to send my Tax Neo back, because I was getting a weird burning smell, I bought it in Europe while I was there. It was going to be 650 Canadian dollars for the slowest possible FedEx method. That was half the price of the trainer. And if they determine there's nothing wrong and I have to absorb shipping costs, even if I don't get their corporate rate, I could just buy a new trainer. I could buy a higher end trainer. What does this all really mean? Well, why didn't Ant get crushed by BLE? I mean, it's pretty simple, is that Ant Plus has a more rigorous standard. It's cheaper to access, like way cheaper to access. They're not so pedantic on like, oh, you changed your antenna. We want to do a full RF spectrum test that costs more than FCC testing, like 3 times more to this day, to do a minimum battery of some of the Bluetooth testing that doesn't include certifying that it conforms to the protocol that gets, the cycling power service or the cycling speed and cadence services. No, none of that. Just to make sure, even though it was a certified Bluetooth device, you put on your own antenna, that'll be $45,000 please. When you can do like multi-location, like Japan, Australia, Canada, United States, Europe certification for about $15,000. The Bluetooth is 45 for like one thing, and the more you change, the more it has to be tested. So most people just kind of skirt and ignore Bluetooth and don't pay them, and like just even list it, assuming you can point to other things and say, oh, we're using this, we're using that. They are all pre-certified. It's $8,000. To actually get Ant to certify your device, between like $750 and $1,500. You mail it to them and they certify it, and if it fails, they let you know where it failed. Bluetooth doesn't have any of that. So, I mean, except for all this incompatibility stuff, where is Strava coming from by pointing fingers at, oh, Bluetooth causes instability? Well, if the APIs are sorted on the Android devices, and the APIs have long been sorted on iOS devices, where is this app crashing bug going to likely be located? It's it's going to be located in the Strava app. It's likely going to be located in code that they have written and a potential lack of understanding of BLE and probably ANT. They didn't really point fingers at ANT, but they're ditching its support as well. But that doesn't really matter because it's only available on a handful of Samsung phones and if you use like USB to on-the-go adapters. But barring that, the code bug is likely in the code that they've written. So just like every other company out there, they could fix it. And I mean, even Raymaker said that they're using, even if it's 1% of their installed customer base that actively use their apps, it's like 200,000 people. So there's a lot of people I've seen in forums, or a lot of them are fairly upset with this. And it makes sense. However, one of the things that I've done a bunch of these startup weekends. You go in on a Friday and you pitch ideas, you choose one, you make a team. Saturday and Sunday, you run through everything, you try and build a mock-up or get data or something, and then Sunday evening you present in front of local judges. Like Techstars is one of the biggest guys that does this. They run their own incubators and stuff, but they also run these startup weekends. And this one, these last two that I did were powered by Techstars. So it was really interesting to see because we had some really good speakers who talked about who is your customer. And I don't think we as users are Strava's customers. Strava Summit is just a way of them experimenting to try and tier the product. The real customers are people who are using the GPS data for city planning, for analysis, for R&D, for advertisement. That is their customer. When you think about that being their customer, and we're just data generators, well, it makes sense to be like, it's, when this happens, we lose 1% of our data. Well, we want that data. They may be this middle tier of people that, we don't have data on. So if we lose that data, and we're going to lose it anyway, let's try and enable and flip them to not using it. And it also is, as far as I understand, Summit, you have to pay for Summit in order to get sensor access. That was one of the perks. So if they take away that perk, it means they're not making money off of it. So you are not the customer. Their customer is these big agglomerations or cities or whatever. And when you understand it in that way, it's easy to see that, of course, they drop it. Rather than spend a bunch of dev time to fix it, rather than try and hire people who are more expert in sensors and sensor communication, which are rare, several of the startups can't seem to find anyone with any meaningful experience with this stuff. And when they do, they're usually not in the same country. So it's hard to find people who are actually experienced. And BLE is just this terrible mess that no one has really fully kind of gotten their act together on. There's still power meter incompatibility out there. And like I say, it's gotten better, probably driven by Zwift on Apple TV. But from the Strava side, they don't care. You're not the customer. Their customer is the big guys who are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, this is just my opinion and a bunch of speculation, but there's no reversing this because you're not valuable. You are the data. You are the product. Now, I use Strava, sorta, kinda. I randomly have things on private, not private. Because Strava's security, if you want it on a leaderboard, you can just go download someone else's ride. You can get second by second access to the ride. It is easy and it's necessary in order to display their leaderboards for King of the Mountain, Queen of the Mountain stuff. So yeah, this has been a little ranty. But I wanted to kind of give the perspective that isn't isn't an industry reviewer, isn't someone who actually has worked in this industry, who is still working in this industry, but I don't do BS. I don't think it's worth it. I don't do marketing. So, yeah, it's just a play to get more of your data, and you're not valuable. Like some customers, you're not valuable. There's way better training software, training tracking software, things like Training Peaks that does a much better good job of analyzing your data. If you're on the top end, if you're on the low end, you're just using free Strava as your, the Facebook of sports, which is, very necessary. And, Facebook is one of these things too. They are just there to sell your data as one of their main modes of making money, and their second mode is ads. Strava is doing the same two-tiered approach. The primary mode is selling to your aggregate data to whoever, and their secondary thing is, if we can make a little extra money off the side by one guy who worked 6 months on some light features, we can upcharge $15 a month, and we only have a 0.1% conversion. Yeah, that paid for his salary and then a bunch of extra money. So I hope this provides a little bit of insight into the whole world of sensors and, I guess, the financial gains or the attempted financial gains in this world. It's not evil. It's just understanding who your customer is. We're not their customer. At least I'm definitely not. I've never paid for premium Strava, even when it was called premium.